childhood sexual abuse. I struggle with grief still, but I'm doing a whole lot better. Tonight, I get the pleasure of introducing one of my closest and dearest friends, my sister in Christ. If you're here needing a story of grace and forgiveness, you're in the right place tonight. This is a story of giving it and receiving it. So if you're in need of both, you're in for a delightful story. I would like to call up my sister, Tina.
Good evening. My name's Tina. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. God's still working on a lot of things with me. One of them is anxiety, self-image, and still have a little bit of anger. I'm going to get right into my testimony. I was born in May of 1976 to a family of 9. My parents, 4 brothers, 2 sisters, and then I was the baby of the family. My dad was a truck driver. My mom was either a homemaker or worked in the factory or as a housekeeper. We were a poor family that would live week to week. My dad was a raging alcoholic, which I didn't realize because my mother enabled him, and he could have written the book on codependency. I don't remember a lot about growing up, and sometimes I think it was because of the trauma and the fear I lived in. My dad was very mentally and physically abusive to my mom, 4 brothers, and one of my sisters. I remember him being in a lot of accidents. He was always drunk every day. At about the age of 5, I remember one night when my dad came home and started a physical fight with my mom and one of my sisters. It was so bad that when my mom and my sister finally got away, we had to run and hide at a local playground. Back then, they used big tractor tires to play in, and we had to hide in them until my dad went home and passed out. We had to walk to a women's shelter. At 5 years old, that was a really long way. We stayed the night, and the next morning we had to walk home. I was about 7 years old, and I remember having night terrors every night to the point that I wouldn't let my mom or my sister put me down. I would not put my feet on the floor. It was so weird, but as I reflect back, it was probably a lot to do with the violence I saw. My 2 older brothers went into the Army and got stationed in Germany for a couple of years. The mental and physical abuse by my dad went on until I was about in the 4th grade. When my 2 older brothers came back home to the States, they both got married. My first nephew was born in September of '86. One night when I was 10, my nephew stopped breathing, and my brother had to perform CPR. Come to find out, my nephew had survived SIDS. The doctors were just learning about this. My nephew had to wear a belt that went around his chest while he would sleep, and it would go off if he stopped breathing. I thought this was so traumatizing. Right before my 5th grade year, we lost our family home because my parents couldn't afford to pay for it. This was the house I grew up in, the only home I knew. We moved out of town to a trailer park. I had to change schools, make new friends. I wasn't accepted at the new school. They were primarily upper-class families, and we were poor. I started struggling in school and had no friends. I wasn't allowed to do extra sports or activities because we didn't have the money to pay for them. I finally made a friend that lived near me, and we had a lot in common because her stepdad was an alcoholic, mentally and physically abusive as well. She went through some of the same things I had. When I started middle school, my dad had stopped drinking. He was still mentally and physically abusive to my sister and my mom. My dad never apologized for the trauma he put my siblings or my mom through. In 7th grade, I met my best friend. She was a tough girl. She had a lot of life experiences I didn't have. I knew she looked out for me and protected me. I will forever be thankful for that. I started staying a lot at her house because her mother let her do more things and my parents wouldn't let me do anything. One reason was we lived in the country, so it took money to go to town. Some of my best childhood memories are hanging out with her. Going into the 9th grade, we had to go to different high schools. I didn't know what I was going to do without her. I had to make new friends once again, which was always hard for me. I did, however, still get to see her every weekend. This was also the year I started dating my very first boyfriend. I became sexually active. My boyfriend and I lived close to each other so we could walk to see each other. We dated for about 2 years, and then he broke up with me. I was devastated over the breakup. I couldn't figure out why he broke up with me. This began a lifelong struggle of wondering why wasn't I good enough. I tried everything to get him back, and until he started using drugs, and that was the life I didn't want part of. I guess I was a chicken in a sense. This became a period of my life where I started using sex as an escape. I thought as long as I was having sex with boys, they'd want me and love me. I know this was wrong, and they treated me horrible, and they were using me for sex. I had 3 sexual partners during this time, and one was in his 20s. By this time, I had started working 2 jobs, one at a grocery store and the other at a local restaurant. I hung out with my friends as much as possible, and I thought my life was pretty great. In 1993, I quit school and started talking to a man from work that was 7 years older than me. I thought I didn't need an education. I was doing just fine. Things were getting pretty serious with this man. However, my parents had no idea about him. I would always drive this man home, and he would hang out for a bit. We would hang out for a bit, and then I would go home. I should have realized he was just using me. I thought he really liked me, when in reality he was really trying to make a girl we worked with jealous. I found this out because he asked her to go with him to his sister's wedding. I was a wreck over this, and once again wondering, why was I not good enough? I noticed he had always needed me to take him home, and found out this was because he lost his license and was on house arrest for stealing vehicles. I was like, what in the world have I gotten myself into? My parents didn't like him at all. However, I knew what was best for me, not. And was going to do what I wanted to do. We dated, if that's what you want to call it, on and off for a while. We finally broke it off, and I found out at 16 that I was pregnant. I really didn't know what I was going to do. My parents found out the same time I did. I was so heartbroken that I had disappointed my parents. I was so scared because we were no longer together, and I had no idea how I was going to take care of a child on my own at 16. I was still a child myself. My parents and sister were there to help me. He was already dating someone when I told him, and he said he would be there for me, but he never really was. I went into preterm labor at 4 months and had to stay in the hospital by myself for 2 weeks because my parents had to work. He never came to see me while I was there. I saw him maybe 3 times the whole time I was pregnant. He did come to the hospital just before I delivered my daughter, and he left the night and came back the next day. During this time, I went into a big depression. My feelings were all over the place. I lived with my parents, worked nights, so my parents or my sister kept my daughter while I worked. My dad was getting ready to retire right before I had her, and he was talking about moving to Arkansas. My parents bought land in Maynard. My dad came to Arkansas in October of '93 to get everything prepared for my mom to move here. I still wasn't sure what I was going to do. I didn't want to move, but I knew I couldn't count on the father of my daughter, and I could not take care of everything myself. So after our 6 weeks checkup, we headed with all of our things to Arkansas. My daughter's father saw her for a little bit right before we left, and I didn't hear from him or see him for a few weeks. I did tell him he could come to Arkansas and get a job and a place, and we could try to work on things. So about a week or 2 later, he wanted to come, so I went and got him. But when we got here, we lived with my sister and her husband, and children. He never looked for a job, so therefore we couldn't get our own place. I finally told him he had to go back to Illinois because I wasn't taking care of him and a baby too. That was the last time he saw me or his daughter. I still question, why wasn't I good enough to be loved? About a month after he left, my brother and sister had a friend who was asking questions and wanted to know details about me. He wanted to go out on a date, but I didn't like his lifestyle. I was a mom and didn't party or anything. Being a mother was all I cared about. I would not date him, but my sister knew I wouldn't hurt his feelings, and so she told me that if he asked me, I wouldn't tell him no. One night, my sister and I were looking for her husband because he was out partying and didn't come home. We saw our brother and this guy downtown Maynard, and we pulled over to see if they saw my brother-in-law. My sister gets out of the vehicle and goes over to talk to our brother, and the guy comes over to the car and gets in. He asked me out on a date. I wasn't going to be rude, so I said yes. But I told him, not if you're drinking, because I don't do that stuff. And I found out he was drinking before coming to get me. I would not go. We went on our first date on Saturday evening. We had a nice time. He was very nice to me. He asked me if he could come and get my daughter and I the next day and take us to a place called Mammoth Springs. I said yes. As long as he wasn't drinking, we would go. He was nice to my daughter, and we started hanging out a lot. A few months talking to him, I found out that he used to be engaged to my cousin, whom I didn't get along with, and I didn't know much about her life. And it had been about 2 years, so it wasn't a big deal. She cheated on him at a party, so they broke up, and she moved back to Illinois. While we were dated, I found out he cheated on me at least 4 different times, and once was my cousin that he was engaged to. The other women were ones they partied with, and partying wasn't my thing. I just stayed home with my daughter, and if I'm being honest, I didn't know his life that well. I always forgave him for cheating. I wanted to be wanted and loved. I didn't realize he did drugs until 1996 when I had moved into my own apartment and we broke up because he decided he wanted to be with my cousin. This is when I found out I was pregnant with my second daughter. I was trying to figure out how I was going to raise another child on my own because he was busy partying and living life. I finally asked him to stop by my apartment to talk. I told him I was pregnant, and he said that I needed to see a doctor. He left my house that day, and I didn't hear from him or see him. So after a few weeks went by, I was tired of being the one always hurting. I wanted him to feel the pain I felt, so I slept with his best friend. Knowing it would get back to him, he eventually didn't care about me. He evidently didn't care about me, so therefore it shouldn't bother him. I was about 2 months pregnant when I started seeing someone. He knew I was pregnant and the mother of a toddler. He was moving away from Pocahontas, and he wanted us to move with him. I let him take care of us. Even though I didn't love him, I moved with him, thinking I would eventually, in time, I would fall in love. He was what I needed, someone to help me with the girls. We moved to Northwest Arkansas with him, and I got a job. He helped me with my daughter, and I tried everything to fall in love with him, but it just wasn't there. So after a few months, I moved back home. When my ex found out I was back in town, he wanted to talk, so we met up, and we forgave each other. We decided to buy a little house next to his dad and become a family. By this time, I had my second daughter, and she was a few months old. Things hadn't changed much. He continued to party, but was mostly outside our house with his friends, hanging out in the shed. I would be in the house taking care of the girls, and he would stay outside all night and then go to work. If his friends had their children, he would tell them to come on over. She will watch her kids too. I should have known that they were doing more than just drinking, but I was so naive. I never knew what was going on in that shed. I just remember he was always out there and not in the house with us. One night, we had a get-together with his sisters and their friends. They came to hang out and got drunk with him outside. I went outside to speak with him, and I couldn't find him. That is when I found out he was in the backyard making out with one of his sister's friends. And of course, I was mad and hurt. There he was cheating on me again. We got into a big argument, and that was the first time he got physical with me and broke the screen door. The next day, we went on with life like nothing ever happened. Once again, I'm left wondering why wasn't I good enough, pretty enough for him to stay faithful. I thought if I didn't say anything more about he would he would see he truly loved me like I do him. I tried everything to make him look at me the way I looked at him, but never happened. He partied all our money away until we lost our house, truck, etc., due to the drugs and alcohol. I really didn't know the extent of his drug addiction until we lost our house. I was finding an apartment in town. When I came home to find out he was cheating with my cousin again. They were even staying in our house together. I found out because she was bragging to the family about being with him. I was so upset with myself that I let him keep hurting me this way. Why was I not good enough? Why did he keep doing this to me? He always chose someone else besides me. This is around 1997, and he lost his job and started working on the riverboats. I had forgiven him yet again. I thought he can't party and cheat on me while on the riverboats. Things will get better. I found out I was pregnant again and due in June of 1998. This would be my third child and his second. I continued to allow him to mentally abuse me and the girls. When he was home, he continued to cheat, party, and lie. He decided he was going to go to truck driving school after our third daughter was born. While he drove over the road, he continued to drink and even started gambling. I often wondered if he was cheating too. He came home one week and every month, so I was basically a single parent. This was early 1999. My life was a disaster and not getting any better. I went and got my GED and started college and graduated with a business degree in 2001. Things didn't change. He partied and did what he wanted. I was there for him to come home to. In 2004, I told him one day he would come home and the kids and I would be gone. This is when I found something that looked like rocks in his shaving kit in the bathroom, and I asked him what it was because I knew it was some kind of drug. We got in a fight. The next morning, he left for work. I packed up the kids and my things and moved out. He came home. We were gone. I moved out of town to get away from him, and we divorced in late 2004. In November of 2006, he lost his mom while she was asleep. This is the first time I wasn't there for him. He stayed so drunk. He couldn't even remember how to get to the cemetery. He got weekend visitations with the girls, so he'd come home from the road and pick them up and take them back to his house and drink, pass out, and they would call me, and I would have my sister go get them while I was at work. One Friday night, he was supposed to meet to pick up the girls. I had to work, so my sister was going to take them to meet him. I told her if he was drunk, do not let them go. Well, he came pulling up at our meeting place in the semi, and he was drunk, so she called me and told me. I told her to call the cops. Don't let the girls go. He continued to try to get the girls to get in the semi with him. And when he saw the cops coming, he took off in a semi. They had to put out spike strips to get him to stop. He was arrested for DWI, reckless endangerment, driving left to center, etc. He went to jail, lost his CDL, as well as his driver's license. While in jail, a preacher came to the jail and talked about a ministry called Power of Freedom. He decided he was going to go there and get help. By this time, the girls and I lived 45 minutes from Maynard, and we hadn't heard anything from him until one day I received a call from a lady that ran the ministry, and she wanted to talk to me. I didn't have anything nice to say about him because I believed he was just doing this for show, and he really didn't want to change. That just tells you that I didn't have Jesus in my heart at that point. I thought he just wanted people to think he changed and wasn't being fooled by him again. I wasn't bringing the girls to see him, but agreed that his family could come and get them and take them to see their dad. I wasn't going to put us in that situation again. That lady did not like my attitude, and I didn't like that she was sticking up for him and not seeing him for who he really was. I wasn't religious and I never really went to church, but I finally decided that the girls needed to see their dad, and I took them one Sunday. I finally saw a change in him. We continued to visit with him every Sunday for 9 months. In 2007, he lost his father to a long battle of cancer. Then in 2008, I lost my dad. Our children were scared for us to get back together, but God healed our relationship and we were married in December of 2008. He moved in with us 45 minutes away and started a new life with the girls and me. He never apologized to the girls for all the hurt he caused them, and he just went on with life like nothing ever happened. I wasn't in love with him when we remarried, but I felt like it was something I needed to do for our family. In fact, I was in love with someone else. I dated for a short time while we were divorced. I didn't tell my husband until after we were married that I'd fallen in love with someone else. I knew when I said that I really hurt him. This is the first time he hurt like I hurt all those years. Hurt people, hurt people. We had some tough times getting along, but we made it and started falling in love. I started falling in love with him again. I sometimes wonder if he believed that I really loved him after that. We moved to Northwest Arkansas for me to finish my degree, but we didn't like it there, and we missed our family and our church home. We moved back to Pocahontas in 2009. He went to work on the pipelines with my cousin's husband, and I stayed in Pocahontas and worked. We bought a house in the Roble Edition that flooded in 2011. We lost most of our belongings. We had great friends we called family that let us stay with them while we remodeled our house. We sold the house as soon as we could because I was so scared it would flood again. Every time it rained. He was still sober and doing good. Our marriage seemed to be on the right track. We had God in our lives, and I thought we were really in love. In 2012, our oldest daughter graduated from high school, got married the next day to a young man that treated her so well. My mom passed away that November unexpectedly, and the family fell apart. My brothers and sisters didn't get along with each other. I still haven't spoken to one of my brothers since the funeral. In 2013, my husband took a traveling job, and he was away from home most of the time and was only guaranteed to be home 2 times a year, Thanksgiving and Christmas. I flew to see him for my birthday. However, he had to work, so some of the ladies that were with their spouses picked me up from the airport while he slept. When he went to work the next morning, I was taking out the trash and noticed a bottle of vodka in the trash can. I never said anything because it could have been one of the other guys, but I knew in my heart he was drinking. I left that Sunday to fly home, and we would see each other again in a couple of months because 2 of our girls and I were driving out to see him for a month during the summer. He came home in October for our daughter's birthday as a surprise. Then he came home in November and December. Everything seemed fine. He didn't seem to be drinking, that I could tell. I hadn't known of any more infidelity in years. He continued to work away from home, and I stayed in Pocahontas with the girls. In 2014, our youngest daughter told me that she was pregnant. I knew my husband wouldn't take this well. He was traveling, so we would have to tell him over the phone. He wasn't happy and almost lost his cool on the young man. My husband decided to come home and went to work for Union Pacific in March of 2015. My daughter was in her junior year when my granddaughter was born in October of 2015. She had lots of complications and spent from 26 weeks to 36 weeks at UAMS in Little Rock. My husband became mentally abusive to the girls at this time, and I believe it was when he started drinking a lot again. In November of 2015, our middle daughter got married against our wishes to a boy in the Army. He was mentally abusive to her, and they moved away to Kansas. She wouldn't speak to me, and I'm not sure why, but she was upset with me. I had to find out she was pregnant by her sister before she eventually texted me and told me. I was so hurt, and I felt as though I wasn't a good mom. We had never gone that long without talking, and I had to hear about what a special moment in her life over a text. I just couldn't understand why. In March 2016, she left her husband, came home, and I was able to be by her side through her whole pregnancy. In August of 2016, our second granddaughter was born. Behind all the happiness, my husband had fallen apart. He was back to drinking. It was affecting our family life. He was drinking. When he was drinking, he was like Jekyll and Hyde. In 2020, our middle daughter caught him sending an inappropriate text to a lady from the pharmacy and told me. I believe he was cheating on me again. I forgave him yet again, and he went to rehab for 30 days. He did okay for a couple months. He came back home, started drinking, and getting mentally abusive. He was losing his mind this time. He told our middle daughter that he didn't think she was his and called her all kinds of names. It was hard to watch him put guns to his head, and our youngest daughter had to take the gun away. He went to yet another rehab work had sent him to. He was there for 35 days. He came home, did well for another few months before starting drinking again. He was driving and drinking, and we would call the cops because we were afraid he was going to harm himself or someone else. The cops caught him passed out in the driveway with his truck and the key in the ignition. And they just made him go to bed. This was when COVID started and they were not taking anyone to jail. He always played with his guns when he got drunk, which was a sign that there was underlying trauma behind his drinking. He left to get a milkshake, and when he came back home, he never got out of the vehicle. 30 minutes go by, the car's running, the doors open, and he was just sitting in the car. I went out to see what was going on, and he was passed out. He drank a pint of straight vodka from the bridge in Pocahontas to our house, which is just a few blocks. He was so out of it, I could not get him to wake up. So I called the police and told them they have to do something because he's going to kill himself or someone else. When they showed up, he was still passed out in the car, and I was so mad because they were just going to have him go to bed. They finally got him awake enough to get him out of the vehicle and into the house to bed. Then after I argued with them, they took his license and gave him a DWI. When he woke up, he couldn't believe he lost his license and possibly his job because you need your CDL to work for the railroad. He called his boss, and they agreed to send him back to rehab. This time he would be flying to Texas for 90 days. He couldn't fly on Sunday because the officer took his license. So he called her, and she told him she would come by and talk to him. She came and tore up the DWI and gave him an open container ticket instead. That's God's grace. She gave him his license back and told him to go get help, and she doesn't want to be called out to him anymore. He left for his 4th rehab that Sunday. He stayed the whole time and came back home. He continued to do good for a while, but none of this rehab work sent him to have the power, the true power it takes to recover, God. He took another job on the road, gone 8 days, home 6. By his second time gone, I noticed a difference in him. I caught him drinking. Our relationship was struggling with trust, and there was no intimacy anymore. I was really trying hard to make our relationship work, and I was talking to some of the ladies that were my friends, so I thought, about our issues, and I didn't understand what was going on. But I felt like he was just with me because it was all he and I knew. I was always by his side through everything. We went to church with these ladies and their families. They knew our struggles. I thought that I could trust them. His drinking continued while I was out of town for a wedding shower, and he took his motorcycle out and started drinking and driving, and he wrecked. He should have died that night, but God. This man should not have survived. I was 7 hours away from home when I got a call that he was arrested, and he wouldn't let them take him to the hospital. They called someone who was able to go get him and take him to the hospital. He would survive, but had broken ribs, bruised kidneys, road rash for days. I started praying for this man that had slipped back into the old ways and become someone I never wanted to see again. But this wasn't the end. There's so much more. During this time, A friend was having a hard time with her husband because he had left her and started using drugs. And he had gone a couple months. He was gone a couple months, and I was trying to encourage her and be there for her. She would ask my husband questions about how addicts feel and what they need from their spouses. I was aware they had talked, but not to the extent that they did, and thought she was a true friend. While my daughter's husband was sitting beside my husband, he saw a text. This lady, and my husband texted this lady, and they told each other that they loved each other. They had been sleeping with each other behind my back after I confided in her with all we were going through. They had no intention of stopping. I was so hurt, not only by my husband, but by someone who was supposed to be my friend. That knew intimate details of our marriage. I was devastated, to say the least. My children were hurt. My middle daughter was caught in the middle again to be the one to have to tell me he was cheating. Our life fell apart. I changed as a person. I had been giving all to my husband, and he was giving his all to someone else. Once again, I felt like I wasn't enough. I moved out of the house and went to live with my daughter. His drinking became all day long during work, missing work, cheating with one woman. I was so lost and hurt, not knowing how I was going to survive. Well, I'm here by the grace of God. A wise man of God told me one night, standing on my porch after my husband had been in a motorcycle wreck, that when I had nothing else to give agape love. I knew I couldn't show him love because I wasn't sure I loved him at this point, because really, why would I? I started studying the Bible about agape love and started praying, making time with God. I would pray over this man that hurt me so bad until I couldn't pray anymore. He would be drunk, and I would just sit with him and pray and cry out to God. By the time it had been gone about a month, and he continued down the road of destruction and stopped going to CR until one night he asked for help. Some of the CR crew asked him to come listen to a gentleman's testimony. He was drinking, so I took him, and he tried to tell me he and she weren't talking or seeing each other anymore, but I knew better. I saw the phone bill. I saw the texts. I phone video calls on his tablet. I really didn't know how to end it because she gave him everything. He really didn't know how to end it because she gave him everything I wouldn't. I wouldn't listen to his poor stories. I was numb to him at this point. I had cried all I could cry. I wanted him to get right with God. I continued to pray, and he would call me, and I would hear him playing with his gun in the background. He wanted to take his own life, but didn't want to go to hell. I told him he probably wouldn't die anyways because God wasn't finished with him yet. He went and listened to the gentleman, gave his testimony, and he could relate to what the guy went through. I could relate to the guy's family and how worried they were and how he destroyed the relationship with his children. I was going through the same thing. So it was Thursday night. On the way home, he asked me to take him to John 3:16 on Sunday. I asked him why he wanted me to take him. And of course, he said, because I love you and I need you. So every night, I would check on him, even though I knew his relationship continued with this lady. I took him Sunday morning to the interview at John 3:16, and he met with the gentleman that gave his testimony on Thursday night. It was kind of a trial run for him because he had to get a few things taken care of before he could actually stay. They told my husband to come home, get things taken care of, and detox, and come back on Sunday for another interview. Let me see. I'm going to kind of skip over. He said he couldn't live without me, and I told him he would have to learn. He needed to rely on God because that was the only one that could help him at this point. While he was driving home one afternoon, I was having a conversation with him. He got mad and hung up. A little while later, I called to check on him, and he was in his truck. I could tell he was drinking. It was so bad. I couldn't tell him. It was so bad, he couldn't tell me, or maybe he just wouldn't tell me where he was. He ran into a ditch, hit a stop sign, ran into another ditch. All of a sudden, I heard the horn go off. He snickered, said, "I'm getting pulled over." There was such a relief when he said that because I knew he would be safe. I started praying and found out he was fine. His truck was fine, and no one else was hurt either. God was with him again. He went to jail for a second DWI and several more charges in less than a month. He went to his bond hearing because I wanted to know what the judge had to say. I was sitting on the bench when he came into the courtroom. He didn't see me right away, and he started looking around the room, and he seen me and asked how I knew he was there. I said, "You dummy, I was on the phone with you the whole time." He went in front of the judge and told him he was trying to get into John 3:16. So the judge said, "If I will postpone your court dates, you must finish with a certificate or you will be back in jail with failure to comply." I just knew that John 3:16 would not take him on Sunday because he was not detoxed. He was still lying, but God told me that I have to forgive him and help him get help. While he was there was no communication with anyone but me and the girls. The oldest daughter had not had any communication with him since this started because he said some hateful things to her and she was hurt. Our middle daughter was also really hurt by the things he continued to say and do during his rage. Our youngest daughter was there as much as possible, and I went on his first visit. I continued to go see him and had forgiven him, but I was still unsure as what would happen to our relationship. I had put it in God's hands. We have had 28 years together, and although a lot were hard, we have good memories. God has taught me so much about grace during this time. He has given me so much grace, peace, and mercy. I have continued to heal through his grace. I am able to say that I have forgiven both him and the other woman. It has been over a year since the storm had consumed our life, and as of September 11th, he has been sober for 1 full year.